You're listening to the Business Wingman Show with father and son hosts Steve and Travis Smith. The Business Wingman Show covers everyday situations affecting business professionals that want to play at the top of their game. This is a no PC zone where the insights are real and the perspectives edgy. Join Steve and Travis weekly and start breaking through the barriers that hold you back. Welcome to the Business Wingman Show. You're listening to the Business Wingman Show. I'm Steve Smith. My son Travis is my co-wingman. Today, we're going to be talking about soft skills and people's attitudes and how relying too much on technical proficiency and not enough soft skill together with a somewhat surly attitude can really make it difficult to work with somebody in the workplace. Would you say yes to that?
I have been waiting for days to have this conversation because absolutely blows my mind how often I will talk with someone, especially who's technical in nature, and it just doesn't seem like this has resonated with them at any point in their career. So this is going to be a good discussion today, to say the least.
Oh, and you know what? Just so everybody that's listening is kind of on the same page. I coach businesses, so I deal with people that could be engineers, they could be accountants, they could be lawyers. They could be people that have real specialties in their business, like logistics and shipping. And Travis, I know you deal with people in a very narrow area of medical device and med tech and stuff like that. So your folks are even more into the technical areas. But all I want to do is make sure everybody knows that technical is just the application, the stuff the stuff you're doing.
Right.
Okay. So do you have an example of somebody right now that you're working with that has this problem?
Hey, I probably have multiple, but the reality is that
we got to keep it clean. This is a family show.
The reality is that I come across in our business, I own a consulting practice, Square One Engineering, but oftentimes the number one reason why someone is removed from a job, whether that's as a full-time employee or as a consultant, is because at the end of the day, it's amazing how oftentimes the perspective of playing well in the sandbox with other people is a foregone conclusion.
All right. So, I've had similar situations, and I've actually worked in companies and worked with people on teams that were like that.
Yeah.
When you're in the workplace with somebody like that, what is it you're seeing that tells you that this person either doesn't have the appropriate soft skills, the relationship building skills, the just being nice skills? What do you see that makes you just cringe and say, I don't know if I want to really spend a lot of time with that person?
From a personality perspective, the ego is probably one of the biggest pieces.
Right.
They're only focusing on the technical part of their job or just their job in general and the performance and outcome. They're not focusing on how their interaction with customers, colleagues, leadership, how that lands and where that leaves people. And so the way that I would describe that is if you're working on a team with someone and when everybody breaks for lunch, everybody goes off screen, leaving that one person to themselves while the rest of the team goes out together and gets lunch. That's that person we're talking about. Or when you're done with a project, it's, God, you know what? That John Smith, it's that same person. And anybody who's listening to this discussion, you know exactly who we're talking about. This is not like we're trying to pick the needle out of the haystack here. Every company has one of these people.
Well, all right. So you made the example of, when everybody breaks for lunch, they go off. Maybe they're all going to the same place. Maybe they're going, but nobody invites this person. This person is just kind of left there. And when in the few headquarters I worked in, I used to see this. And sometimes the folks that were exactly like you're talking about, they didn't expect to be invited. In some ways, they kind of looked at themselves as being maybe a little too high up for that. Their job was to go back to the office and work on the next major initiative and get a head start over everybody else while they were down the street at some local restaurant. Now, okay.
You know what though? To that point is I had a consultant, this was a couple years ago, but I'll just never forget this because he was just missing the bigger picture. This gentleman in our world within medical device, quality systems is kind of the end all be all. Every medical device company has to have a quality system.
Mm-hmm.
This consultant did nothing but go in and help companies build the quality system or get in compliance.
Okay.
Him and I are out to lunch one day, and he says to me, I'll just never forget this. He goes, my job is to go in there and get the ship straight. I'm not there to make friends. And I'm just sitting there like shaking my head like, oh my God. And the best part was about a year or so later, I started running into different circles of people who had interacted with this guy. We'll call him John Smith. Every one of these people said, I would never work with John Smith again. Technically, he's great, but people just don't like working with him. And in fact, people are kind of like looking at each other like, hey, you know, I'll meet you over at Johnny Rockets. Don't tell anybody. And it's like they're going out of their way to not interact with this person.
All right. So, but you brought up, and I love that comment about, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to straighten out the ship, get things right. Okay. And I'm sitting there thinking, if the business owner knew this person or did any due diligence, you know, interviews, whatever, talk to them for 5 minutes, they probably could have gained that same perspective and thinking, okay, we got a real problem here. The reason I'm bringing somebody in from the outside is so they can straighten up the ship. And I don't really care whose feathers get ruffled in the process. Do you think that at all is maybe part of the grand design?
Of course, I think that happens. Now, I think part of the other issue is just the culture within the company that allows that. So, for example, at my company here, if that was going on and for whatever reason I was unaware of it, I mean, first and foremost, fire me from my own company if I'm not aware of what's going on in my company like that. Right. But I would sincerely hope that one of my own employees would come to me and say, hey, you know what? This John Smith guy, he's just not jiving with us. And yes, I just used the word jiving, but I mean, like, you have to have a culture that drives that kind of feedback, because if it's not, what that means is, I mean, heaven forbid you have that situation going on and your employees are dealing with it. What if it's a longer situation? What if this project is a year or two? So now you're asking your employees to deal with that kind of stuff. And what if somebody quits because of it, a good employee?
Well, okay. So what if it's not a consultant that's being hired on a contractual basis, project basis? What if it's somebody that's being hired as an employee to the team and they pass all the HR tests and they do a great job in the interviews, and within about 2 weeks of showing up, it's almost like they morph into a different person.
Happens all the time.
They're not congenial. They have a little bit of a, for lack of a better term, kind of an uppity attitude. Mm-hmm. I see this stuff happening quite a bit. And the problem is everybody sees it, right? Because people interface with this and they don't like the way they talk to them. They don't like the way they cut them out of communications. There's a whole bunch of stuff they do. Sometimes they even create conflicts which go unresolved. So why is it, if that's going on, why doesn't it go up to the department manager? I mean, this is what I find interesting, is that one person can come into an ordinary, well-adjusted, work environment and just kind of systematically unravel it.
Yeah. And oftentimes the people who are going to leave are your best employees, your best players. Oh, yeah. Because they're just not going to put up with that kind of crap. Right. And, we've talked about that plenty of times before.
Right.
But when you look at a situation where someone's attitude or mindset is allowed to operate like that within a culture, that is one of the first indicators that a culture is struggling within a company. Whether it's a consultant or a full-time employee doesn't really matter.
Right.
Like case in point, I worked beside someone for the better part of probably 6-7 years. And this individual turned over during that time the better part of 6, 7, 8 employees. And the first 4 or 5, management did absolutely nothing.
Right.
Now they had conversations with the person.
Right.
So it wasn't like people didn't know what was going on, but they allowed it to happen. And only at the point in which it was now a habitual problem, which was we got to termination, fire, resign, however you want to kind of put that, of employees 6 and 7, then management was like, oh, this is actually making us look bad now in the process. We've got to do something about it.
Right. The
and it's
backlash
like,
is hitting us.
You just shake your head. You're like, why did it take this long for action to occur? Right. And
All right. So let's go in this direction, because I think once you identify someone who is creating these kinds of workplace problems, to me, you have to really very quickly figure out, are these just habits and behaviors that this person is completely unaware of? I mean, and look, I've run into them before. They're just covered in blind spots. They have no idea how they come off, how they talk to other people, the reactions they get. They don't read anything. They're just too thinking about what's going on in their own head. Yeah. And then you have other people who along the way in their career have figured out that they can go in and take charge and kind of do what they want, and nobody's really going to kick back. So it's more intentional. So what do you do with let's take the person that's kind of blind to the whole thing. What do you do with them when you start to figure out that they're creating more issues than they're solving problems for the business?
So I'm actually going to challenge you on that, Steve. So I think the answer to both those situations is the exact same, which is if you're in a leadership role, well, actually, I'll take that back. Regardless of who you are in the company, if you've identified that that's an issue, it's your responsibility to address it. I really believe that.
Oh, I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
But the response to both those issues, which is either the individual knows they're doing it or they're completely unaware, the first approach is one and the same, which is you bring that awareness to that individual. Now, what happens after that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really a different story, because if you're now at a point where you've made somebody aware, I mean, let's call it like it is. They're an asshole.
Yeah.
And then they don't do anything about it. All right. You have a different situation on your hands. But
no, don't you think that a lot of managers, and some of them could have been around for a long time, they're just risk averse. They don't like dealing with conflict, or you could be dealing with fairly new people that just don't have the experience. Don't you think one of the reasons why people tend to shy away from, as you put it, bringing awareness to the situation is because they're kind of thinking what the blowback's going to be like, and they don't want to go there?
Sure. I mean, I actually lived through an example of this about a year ago. We were working on a project with a client. One of the client's own employees was causing problems on the project. I literally had that client say to me, we're aware of it, but we just got to get this project done. And then when the project's done, we'll deal with it. Well, guess what happened? That exact same employee didn't stop. They kept causing problems, and it delayed the project by like 4 or 5 months.
Right. So they sidestep their own responsibility, just thinking we can handle it and deal with it until the project gets finished. Yeah.
But, I mean, that goes back to the whole idea of I have a target in front of me. I'm going to close my eyes and shoot and just hope the arrow hits the bullseye.
Right.
Nothing ever works out that way.
Right.
You're going to miss 100% of the time. So you're better off confronting the issue in the moment, right? I learned this the hard way. I was lucky enough to go through a fair amount, just like yourself, a fair amount of management training early on in my career. And the one thing that I learned, which is most important in these moments, is when you have to give feedback like that, you have a surly individual for whatever the reason is,
right?
That feedback has to happen in the moment. You can't hit somebody up 3-4 weeks later and tell them, hey, 3 weeks ago you were being a real jerk.
Right.
It's not going to resonate with that person.
Right.
But you have to give them the benefit of the doubt, regardless of what your personal feelings are on the matter, and bring that awareness to them. After the fact, if you don't start to see changes, you still have to go back to them and say, hey, you and I talked about this 2-3 weeks ago.
Right.
If you can't, you get your bearings straight and or start to shape up, I'm going to have to go get management involved. Or I'm going to have to advise XYZ, whoever is leading the project or the work, that we need to make some changes. That's not easy to do.
No, it's not. Now, let me throw another aspect of this, because on 2 occasions over the last probably 3 or 4 years, I've been hired by companies to come in and coach people who were at fairly high levels of operational importance in their business, who had the exact kind of attitudes that you just described. So they were the culprits. They were the ones creating the problem. And the people above them had the conversations that brought it to their awareness. Nothing changed. So at that point, they made a decision. Okay, we're not going to let this person go because they really do understand our business. You know, it'd be tough to replace them. We've got to figure out another way to try to change them. Right. So that's when I get the phone call. So if you're in a situation where you're now having to work with somebody that's creating this problem, you know, what is it? How would you approach this whole thing? What would you do to help not only get them to be aware of their behavior and how it's being perceived, but do it in a manner that makes them think about the possibility of changing and what that might lead to?
So the story I'm going to share, I'm openly admitting before I even get into this story, this has to be the right environment to do something like this. I was lucky enough I was in a mid-level management position with our team to be a part of this group that came in. This was an external company, and they facilitated a feedback session with our management team.
360, is that what they did?
Yeah, it was pretty close to that. Okay. But the interesting thing was the senior leader on the team, in this case, it was the director of operations, had picked key people within the operation to go sit on a hot seat. And that individual, I'm not joking, that individual sat on a bar stool with every one of their peers circled around him. And for an hour, their peers gave that individual feedback. I mean, I saw grown men cry in this session.
So were there any parameters in terms of what feedback and how it was to be served up and what the reason for the feedback? Did they do anything like that before they started?
Yeah. I mean, it had to be respectful,
right.
The obvious stuff, no cussing, no art,
right.
But the person sitting in the chair, interestingly enough, had just as many parameters. They couldn't refute everything. They had to listen.
Right.
They had to let somebody fully finish before they could respond and all this kind of fun stuff. But I will openly tell you it was a really tough exercise. That completely changed the framework of that team moving forward.
Was it up for the better or for not?
It was for the better eventually, but there were definitely some people that were sore with other people after that, because it's, right. I mean, look, you're on blast in front of your colleagues. So that's why I'm saying it's not a tool or an exercise that is, you really have to have strong leadership to pull something like that off. So second to that, you have maybe the site lead, the CEO, the owner of the company, and then that person's boss in a closed room, and it's feedback time. And it's, hey, this is what we're observing. This is what's not landing well. This is what's coming as a result of that. What's your thoughts? Because at that point, now you're assessing, does this person see it for themselves? And if they don't, how can we help them get there?
Right.
And it's never one session. And I know you know that because you do this more than I do.
Right.
It's a multiple discussions down the road. And these are not easy conversations.
No. In fact, I was going to suggest with that kind of that 360 style feedback that you had shared with us, that if you're going to do that, and I've been involved in a number of those, and one of them did not work well at all. I mean, it was a borderline disaster.
Well, what happened there?
Well, the owner of the company, I had suggested this might be a way to get the rest of the department to understand what was happening because of the supervisor's behavior. And he took that one step further and decided that this was going to be a tool to actually set her up for dismissal.
Oh my God.
So right in the middle of starting this thing up and explaining the parameters to everybody, he decides to take over and just start lambasting her. And then it became a pile-on.
Did you just say lambasting?
Yeah. I could have said Donnybrook, but nobody wants to hear that term either.
I don't think anybody wants to hear lambasting either.
But, the point is everybody kind of got involved, and I'm really surprised it didn't end up, resulting in a lawsuit. It didn't. About 30 days later, she resigned. But that was a very, very tense example of these kind of tools can work really well when they're conducted and facilitated correctly. So, people listening to this now, if you know 360s and maybe you need kind of an intervention style thing with somebody that's important to you, but not is creating major problems in the workplace, hire somebody that does this professionally. Do not try this yourself.
Yeah. Well, and to the point that you kind of gracefully went over about the lawsuit piece.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not for the weak. Meaning, meaning, I would not suggest jumping into an exercise like that if you haven't been coached on how to do it.
Right.
I mean, and there are, like you said, there are organizations out there that do this full time. And maybe we can put some links for some of those types of organizations in, and I know you do that as well. So, but I think the biggest thing is ensuring that at the beginning of that conversation, clearly explaining to whoever is involved in that intimate group the parameters of, one, what we talk about in here does not leave this room.
Right.
And two, what the true intent of the discussion is, that we're here to help. This is not a blasting session for the purpose of making you feel like an idiot and like you're a bad employee.
Right.
I mean, those two things are so important at the beginning of that discussion that that's what sets the tone for the rest of what's to come thereafter in your lamb basting.
In my lamb basting. Well, the other thing I was going to say, I know I have all these ancient terms, and you can go look them up. They're actually terms, but nobody uses them anymore. One of the things that I find people that are in positions where they have to provide feedback is that they don't focus on the behavior. They somehow muddle that with the person itself. And there's no greater way to have one of these things go off the rails than to start talking about the individual, because now you're throwing judgments in there and you're throwing other things that person's going to take, they're going to be defensive over. You have to keep it objective, and you have to keep it, you have to keep it based on the behavior you observe or behavior you're getting feedback from other people about.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I mean, when we talk about, as we started off this discussion today, talking about those soft skills and how important it is to rise above your personal capabilities or whatever keeps you in the job, right? Really, at the end of the day, if you think about it, outside of being able to perform well in your job, it's how well you play nicely with other people in the sandbox.
Right.
And I know how that sounds. It sounds cheesy and it sounds like I'm a millennial, which I'm not, but that's so important in today's business environment. If you want to be successful at what you do, you have to play nice with others. And that's just how it is.
Well, and it's funny because just a week ago, I gave a training session to a company on business etiquette. And this was in there. And it really talked about, you can have disagreements with people. You can be at the other end of a debate with somebody about a procedure or how to do something. But when you start demonstrating a lack of respect for other people, that's where it ends. That's where now people, they change the reason for dealing with you and how they're going to deal with you, and it just escalates from there. So you're right. You can be hard, you can be tough, you can stick to your guns, but if you start showing people that you don't respect them, you don't really care about them or their opinions or the fact that maybe this time they're right, you're going to have problems.
Yeah.
You're going to have problems. So.
And on a side note, before we close up here, can we please in the next episode or two talk about business etiquette, because that craft has completely gone out the window.
Yeah, you know what? I was just thinking I'll have to dig out my notes on that, because that was quite interesting. And I'll just give you a sneak preview on that. My philosophy has always been that when you're in a company, employees at all levels basically take on two statuses, okay? They either become a commodity, which means they show up every day, they sit in their office, they do their work, they punch out at 5, nothing more. Or they set themselves up as an asset. They go above and beyond. They learn things on the fly. They contribute, they volunteer. And companies will invest in assets. Companies protect assets. Companies keep assets. Companies trade commodities. And so, yeah, that's a great topic. And I think you're right. I think we should tee that up, because too many people today, they get laid off and they don't really understand why. And companies aren't going to tell them, because sometimes legally you can't. All you can do is say, you know what, you're not right for this business, so Friday is your last day.
Damn, that was good. You're giving away all the free secrets here. So key takeaway being, be an asset, not a commodity.
That's right. That's right. But for this show today, respect people. You can have a point of difference, but if somebody invites you into their office and says, Travis, you do some phenomenal work around here, but what I want to talk to you about has nothing to do with that. Listen, and don't argue. Just listen. Let them say what they got to say, because chances are you're going to hear something that could be a career changer. Listen
and then say thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. All right, Bud. Great call. Great show today. Somebody likes what we're talking about. How should they get a hold of you? What's the best way to?
Well, come find me on LinkedIn. Travis N is in Nathaniel Smith, because believe it or not, there are 4 Travis Smiths that live in Orange County here. So
my heart bleeds for you. What if you were named Steve Smith?
I know. Well, yeah.
There's one in every zip code. That's right.
You can also find me at Square One, as in the number 1, engineering.com.
Cool. And my name is Steve Smith. My company is Growth Source Coaching. You can also find me on LinkedIn. And take a look at our Business Wingman podcast page on LinkedIn and follow it. And that'll give you some notifications as to future video casts coming up. You can also listen to the audio version on www.businesswingmen.com, where we have our bios and other nifty stuff that you can learn about as you listen to more of our episodes and get to know a little bit about us. So thank you for joining us today. We look forward to talking to you next week. And from here on out, what do we say? We're getting ready to land, or what? That's the old show. We don't want to go there.
Like they say in Top Gun, Dad, you can be my wingman anytime.
Oh, yeah, right. That's bullshit. All right. Take care, bud. Nice seeing you.
Ciao.